Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Awareness Podcast. My name is Susan Telford, and this is the section of the podcast called Integrating Spiritual Awakening in Everyday Life. I'm delighted to have as my guest today a fellow Brit, Tom Das. Tom Das is a spiritual teacher and he lives in London with his wife and children. Welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest today.
Thank you, Susan. You're so welcome. It's great to be here.
So I'm looking forward to spending this hour with you. In preparation for this interview, I went to your website. And although I've had a good look around and I've read some of your articles and I've listened to a bit of your Buddha at the Gas Pump interview, which I think was quite a few years ago, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
I think it was
2010, if I recall.
Or maybe not that long ago.
No.
I think it was it 2015 or 2016?
Oh, 16 maybe it was. Yeah. I'm visualizing the the date on it. Yeah.
What's that? That's over 6 years ago now, isn't it?
6 years, yeah. But the part that really struck me on your website was your opening statement on your homepage, which I'm going to read. And I thought actually we could have a whole conversation just about this. So let's see how we go with this. So Tom's opening statement on the homepage of his website, which is tomdas.com, says, "The point of this teaching is the realization of a total freedom, which is already wholly and completely present. The emphasis is on facilitating a genuine, practical realization in the midst of daily living." And as I said in my little introduction, the topic of this segment of the Awareness Podcast is integrating spiritual awakening in everyday life. So that gels very well with your intention on your website. So I wanted to kind of pick that apart and have you talk about what some of the things mean. Now, I know in your everyday life, you're a medical doctor. And so presumably you have quite a scientific brain. I have a degree in math, so I also have that kind of logical brain. So the point of this teaching is the realization of a total freedom. What do you mean by total freedom, Tom?
What do I mean by total freedom? It's what it really means. It's difficult to put into words what it means, but it's a total fullness, without any lack, without any sense of lack whatsoever. And in which there's no suffering there at all. So again, the words aren't quite right, but it's like a total happiness, total fulfillment. It's what I think we're all truly looking for. And so when it's found, when it's discovered, so to speak, and we can explore why I say so to speak later, if you want.
Yes.
When it's found, there's nothing. It's like there's nothing more we need apart from that. That is everything we've been looking for. Now, it may seem like what we want, we might have ideas about what we want and what we need. But when we discover that, let's just call it that, when we discover that, or that freedom, that total freedom, in that it is, in quotes, realized that that is what we're looking for. We might have ideas that we're looking for other things, but actually this is what we're looking for. And when it's found, that's realized. There's nothing else. That's everything I need. Again, I hope that the words aren't quite right, but maybe that's a flavor.
So the first thing that I want to ask is, how have you found that, and what was your journey to that?
Okay, have I found that? The simple answer is yes. But the reason there's a hesitation is because when you find that, the you that was looking is no longer. So it's not really you have found that, or I or Tom has found that. It's like only that.
Yes, and it's not even Tom is that. Is that right?
No, correct.
Yes.
If by the word Tom or I or the seeker, we're referring to this limited body mind entity, then that's it. Not Tom has not found that. Tom is not that. It's only that. It can start to sound a bit abstract.
It can, can't it? It can.
Yeah,
Like, what are you talking about?
I know. And it's like that thing of trying to describe a taste, or if you what does a glass of water taste like? If you try to describe it and be really accurate, it would just sound like waffle. It would just sound like conceptual nonsense. But there's something very real that the words are pointing at, even though the words can sound quite philosophical or abstract. When I was younger, I used to find philosophy fascinating, but now I don't find it interesting at all. I'm not that interested in philosophy at all. It just seems so superficial and conceptual. Whereas this can sound like philosophy, but it isn't at all. It's not philosophy at all. It's very intimate. It's in the heart.
So tell us a bit about your own path. Obviously, I've read you have a very long bio on your website. So you've studied a lot of different modalities and spiritual paths. Tell us a little bit about the journey that has led you to the point that you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, on my website, on tomdas.com, you can see a section there that sort of briefly, maybe not so briefly, but it gives an outline of my journey. And in retrospect, I think I was seeking from a very young age, from maybe 5 or 6. I remember asking questions to myself in my own mind. Why am I here? Why am I Tom? Why am I not someone else? What is the purpose of this existence? These sorts of questions. I had no concept when I was 5 or 6 about spirituality or religion or being a seeker or anything like that. But in retrospect, looking back, I can trace that thread right back to my early childhood. Now,
that's common, I think, isn't it? A lot of people that I've talked to and interviewed have said that they've had almost some mystical experience as well in early childhood, but this real interest, almost a precocious interest, or some kind of knowing that there's more than this at a very young age.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I speak to lots of people all the time about these things, through meetings and through one-to-one sessions over a number of years. And many people, as you say, have got this. They can trace this thread of inquisitiveness or inquiry or something back to early childhood. Not everyone, Not everyone. Some people, they don't have it at all when they're younger, and then later on in life something happens. But you're right, many people have this thing that I can recognize in myself. And often when people come to me and describe what it's like for them, or what it's been like for them, I can totally resonate or relate on some level at least. So yeah, for me, when I was younger, I didn't have any sort of mystical experience. I wouldn't say. Um, but as I got older, as I sort of approached, as I turned 10, 11, 12, I started to become interested in that kind of thing. And a part of me wished I did have some kind of special experience. Often it was things like, at that time, I used to hear and see, read reports of like extra sensory phenomena, telepathy, and maybe sort of communicating with people who had died or from other worlds, things like this. And that interested me. I never had any firsthand experience of that. And I was a child, right? And one of the things you often hear is that, oh, children are really open to it. Children have this kind of sixth sense, but as you grow up, you lose it. Well, I was still a child, and I was thinking, why don't I have this sixth sense? What's happened to me? Is something wrong with me? I can't seem to see any ghosts or read people's minds. So it's something that, it wasn't like a really serious interest of mine, but it was something that fascinated me. But I was just probably just busy being a kid as well, running around.
Your bio, you said that your mum had taught you to meditate and do yoga when you were quite young.
Yes,
You'd
that's right.
had that.
That's true, yes. And another thing I did, which was actually before my mother teaching me yoga and meditation, was I started a martial art called Aikido. Aikido is a Japanese martial art. And I didn't think of it as being amazingly spiritual. It was just something we did every week. And I got very good at it because I started when I was 6. So by the time I was 10 and 11, I'd already mastered pretty much all the techniques I was allowed to master as a child. But there was definitely a spiritual element to that. We used to sit in silence just for a couple of minutes at the end in kind of a kneeling meditation pose, typical of like Japanese Zen style kneeling. And there was a philosophy that was taught to us. And then, yes, when I was a bit older, when I was about 10, my mother taught me pranayama, which is breath, the yogic breathing techniques, and yoga, physical yoga, hatha yoga, meditation. It was more pranayama and physical yoga than meditation that she taught me. But obviously, it all goes together. And that was there. But when I became a teenager, I discovered this book on my parents' bookshelf. Because when I was taught all these things, I wasn't taught it in a spiritual context. I wasn't told, oh, this is for self-realization. When I was taught yoga and pranayama, it wasn't taught to me like, oh, you can realize enlightenment or liberation or the self or something like that. It was just taught to me in a very secular way, like, Tom, this is really good for your body. This is going to help you concentrate. This is going to help you live longer. This will help you be happy. So it was more like a practical tool, like exercise, or like optimizing your diet, or something like this, And same with Aikido. It was like, this is a self-defense technique. It's great for coordination and awareness of your surroundings. And yoga and pranayama, it can help you breathe. I was fascinated by the fact that when I'd started doing pranayama, I found it very difficult at first, as most people do. But within a very short amount of time, my ability to hold my breath and to breathe very slowly massively increased. And with that, my ability to concentrate massively increased. And my ability to keep, if anything was stressful was happening, I could calm myself right down. And it gave me a lot of clarity of mind. Again, I didn't really fully appreciate all of this when I was younger, but looking back, I can see that. And it helped me in my studies. It helped me with sports and things like that. I wasn't overly sporty, but it helped me. And that's the kind of context that was given to me. Am I droning on a bit? Am I going on?
No, not no.
I find I sometimes get a bit bored telling my own story, because
You told
I
me
don't. I'm
so.
happy to do it, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
just,
I just want our listeners to kind of have a flavor of
of
you know,
course,
of how you have come to this total freedom. I think not from a point of view of, do what Tom did and this will happen necessarily. We can talk about that as well, how, we're not um copying what people do. But I think it's interesting to well, I find it interesting to hear about what people's journeys have been like, what the
yeah,
realization they had along the way, the obstacles, all that sort of stuff. Because I know for we read about people who have sudden awakenings. That's it. The whole identification as a separate self disappears completely. But I think for the vast majority of people, it's not like that. It's more a gradual seeing. And so yeah, so that's why I just like to hear how it's been for other people and what insights they have to share from that. So again, from your bio, your first kind of fascination was with Jesus.
yes,
So
yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, as long as I'm not boring you, I'm happy to
okay,
continue. Then you let me know if I'm sort of
I'll tell you if you're boring.
taking too long, and say, Tom, just get to the point. No, I'm very happy to do that. Um, yeah, so my mother actually, having taught me yoga, pranayama, and things like this, she actually converted to Christianity. So we come from a Hindu family,
Yeah.
culturally Hindu, and I was born and brought up in the UK. But we used to go to Hindu festivals and things like this, and it wasn't really religious again. It was more a cultural thing. This is what we did. It was an opportunity to meet people, and then you do the prayers and stuff. But we didn't have a very overtly religious household. It was just like like in the same way many British people celebrate Christmas,
Yes.
but it may not necessarily be religious for them. For many people, it will be. It will have a religious significance. For some people, it's just a cultural thing that you do at the time of year. That's how it was for us. We used to go to the different celebrations, pujas, the little different festivals and things, but it was just something we did. Well, my mum converted to Christianity, and I'd already started going to a local Church of England school. So we were reciting the Lord's Prayer every day at school, and we were singing Church of England hymns and things like this. And again, we just, for me, I just did it because that's what you had to do. And that's what most of the kids at school, they just sort of did it because that's what we did. And I started going along to the church when my mother went to. And between school and my mother's church, I started hearing the teachings of Jesus. And I found these so inspiring on one hand. But on the other hand, it didn't make sense to me because I couldn't believe that this person was a son of God, and that we all had to believe that Jesus was a son of God and this kind of stuff. It didn't. I was like, how do I know?
Yeah.
How do I know he was a son of God? And I was told, well, you've got to believe it. And I was like, well, I don't believe it. I don't have faith. And so, well, you've got to have faith. I was like, well, I don't, and I can't make myself believe something that doesn't seem to make sense to me. Just because it's written in a book, it was bleedingly obvious to the 10-year-old or 11 or 12-year-old Tom, at least, that just because something's written in a book doesn't mean it's true. And just because the book's old doesn't mean it's any truer. If anything, you could argue that if something's written a long time ago, maybe they knew less back then.
Yeah.
So on
Maybe.
one hand, I was inspired by this character of Jesus. Oh, sorry, Susan, did you say something? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, or maybe by a process similar to Chinese whispers, things have become distorted.
Heaven forbid. No, yeah. I mean, those kinds of things as well. I
Yeah.
mean, I hadn't really sort of thought about that at that time, I don't think. I hadn't thought about the fact that these texts were written down by, human beings who had heard Jesus. It was presented to me that this is the Bible. I didn't really think about who composed it, who wrote it, the history of it at that age. But I just thought, how do I believe it's true? Of course, I completely agree now. Chinese whispers, distortions creeping in over time,
Yeah.
interpolations, all these things. These are things I came to investigate later. But I was inspired by this character, Jesus, and the things he said. A lot of what he said wasn't always believe in me, have faith in God. There was that, of course, but there was also things like love your neighbor, which and all the different parables. I just loved them. I really loved them, and I understood some of them, and I didn't understand others of them, but I found it very inspiring. There's something about him
Yeah.
and
I think for
the
me,
character.
I was, brought up in a Christian environment, and in fact became at 16 became a rabid born again Christian. Was
Mm,
really obsessed with Jesus. Was in that whole thing. But the thing that really resonated most with me was the kingdom of heaven is within you.
mm,
I used to think, what does that mean? And that doesn't seem to be what's really being taught. So that kind of stayed with me for years. And I left the church, but that stayed. And something about the person of Jesus, or the person's not the right word, the energy maybe of what Jesus was. I thought there's more to it. There's more to it. It piqued my interest.
yeah, yeah. You
So,
you've oh, you've reminded me of another aspect of my relationship with Jesus, as it were, which is that here was this figure of a young man, who was going against the grain, going against a lot of the culture that he was brought up in, and somewhat radical, and you know, a bit of a troublemaker in many ways.
yeah.
Versus the way we were off. I mean, I saw the hypocrisy, or if I thought of it as hypocrisy, maybe if you don't want to be so harsh, you could just say the contradiction between what Jesus was saying and then what I was being told at school.
Yeah.
And I went to school where things like uniform were very important. What you wore, you got to have, your shoes have to be black and polished, and you got to wear your uniform, got to be tidy. And as we got older, some of the boys wanted to grow their hair long, and that wasn't allowed. And then I was thinking to myself, what about Jesus? He didn't have, he had long hair. What about him? Did he, why aren't we allowed to? I didn't particularly want to grow my hair long,
Yeah.
but I just saw these contradictions. And then I saw how some of the teachers, and there was a lot of hierarchy in the school, and not everyone was nice all the time. Some people were quite mean, and the values that were appreciated in the school, it wasn't always the same as what I saw in Jesus.
Yeah.
So I saw this hypocrisy and contradiction. I didn't see that in my mother's church. My mother went to this kind of born again Christian type church, and it was so, I mean, in some ways it was quite wacky and out there,
Yeah.
but it was actually but the people were so welcoming and warm and kind hearted.
Yeah.
And I loved that about the church. I've got very fond memories of going to that church and the people there, as opposed to my school, which was a wonderful school and is a wonderful school. But, I saw the contradictions there much more. And again, it made me question this whole religion thing, and it put me off religion, really.
Mm.
But I was still captivated by Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I really resonate with that. So moving on in your spiritual journey, your next thing you said my world was turned upside down after finding a copy of Swami Vivekananda's book Raja Yoga on my parents' bookshelf.
That's the one. That's the one. So
So
I very recently found out that this was a gift. So Swami Vivekananda is very, very famous Swami, or holy person, from the part of India my family are from. If you go to that part of India, everybody knows, everybody's heard of him. He's like a Gandhi type figure. But whereas Gandhi had like political links, he was purely spiritual, religious for the most part. Very, very famous. And his guru, Ramakrishna, is also incredibly famous in the parts of India my family are from. But this book was actually given to my parents by a family friend. But I found it on my parents' bookshelf and I started reading it, and it did turn my world upside down. Because until that point, I'd been taught that basically you've got to have faith in God, in Jesus, in Krishna, in Durga, in whichever God you happen to believe in, whether it was the Hindu side of my family or the Christian side, you have to have faith. And this book, written by Swami Vivekananda, was actually a transcription of some of his talks. Swami Vivekananda was saying, no, that's not correct. If you say God exists, you have to know that. You have to see God. You don't say God exists, but you have no knowledge. You just say it out of blind belief, blind faith. No, you have to have an experience of God. And he said all the religions, this was what he proposed, his proposition, was that all religions and genuine spiritual traditions are founded in some kind of experience of the divine. Whether you're Jesus or Muhammad or whoever, Buddha, they all had an experience of the divine. And he said, this is the same for us. It's no good saying, oh, Muhammad had an experience of vision of God, or Buddha had attained nirvana or self-realization or liberation. And that was then, that was hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, but you can't do that now. We have to just believe. He said, no, that's ridiculous. We too need that experience for ourselves. In order for us to say there is a God, we have to have that experience for ourselves. That was the first thing. So that was really interesting for me. But the next thing is what really blew my mind. He said, not only should you have an experience of God before you say, I believe in God, he said, you can have this experience, and here's how you can have it. And he went on in that book to explain a way to have this experience of the divine. Now, I should be clear, this is not a book I currently recommend people to read necessarily. It's a great book, but it's not, I think there are better books in my view out there. But this is my journey.
Yeah.
That's what I came across.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because I was very scientifically minded.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that point, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it was an evidence-based approach, right?
Yes. And because one of the things that I had to get over, I think, on the spiritual path was an intellectual satisfaction almost. Not that it was just an intellectual understanding, but there had to be an intellectual understanding for me. I had to kind of satisfy myself that this was not the ravings of madmen.
Yes.
you know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that part of it, and I didn't just want to know what other people had said. As I alluded to before, I'm not asking you for your life story. So, with the intention of just do what Tom did and you'll have total freedom at the end of it. This thing of having to experiment for ourselves. We can use the example of other people, but we have to conduct our own experiments in our own life. I think to have direct experience rather than just intellectual knowledge, although that's a stage perhaps. So can you speak maybe a bit to that?
Yeah, totally. No, I agree. For me, now I wouldn't necessarily agree with the sort of what I outlined in my journey, which was in Swami Vivekananda's book. He was saying you can only say God exists if you have a direct experience of God. Now I can see the value of faith for those who have faith. It's just that for me, when I was a young boy, I didn't have faith, and my mind wouldn't let me have faith because I was too scientifically minded. Not too scientifically minded. I was scientifically minded. So for me, yes, I needed a scientific type way in. Now, that is not the case for everyone, as I have now discovered through talking to many people. And what actually happened to me a couple of decades later, when, you know, I came across the teachings of what I consider now to be who I now consider to be my guru, Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi. I came across his teachings, and they worked on me in a very different way to anything else, very unique for me. And that was essentially falling in love. See, when I came across Bhagavan Ramana's teachings, when I first came across them, I rejected them. I just thought it was silliness. I didn't quite think it was the ravings of a madman, but it just didn't inspire me, didn't do anything for me when I first came across his teachings. But I think it was like a couple of years later, I came across his teachings again. And I still actually didn't like them very much, to be honest. I didn't really like.
What was it about them that you didn't like? What was it particularly?
I didn't like the concepts he was using. I didn't like he was talking a lot about the self. And at that point in my journey, I was much more interested in no self and the Buddhist type way, or, you know, which seemed more scientific to me and made more sense to me. And he kept on talking about things like the I thought, and you have to cling to the self and discover what you are. And at that point, I think I was, I mean, I'm struggling to remember. I think I was more interested in, you know, just a dissipation of sense of self. And I didn't like this sort of hard concept of a self, of an internal presence or something like that. That didn't, even like a God. And the self-inquiry didn't really make sense to me. I didn't really understand what he was talking about. And then he said some other things. There's a few statements of his that I didn't like. Like he said, someone asked him, is there such a thing as free will? And sometimes he would respond by saying, there is no free will. Everything's predestined. But you do have free will to choose whether or not you turn within or not. So he said, everything is predestined. There's no free will. But you do have free will on one thing only, which is you can choose whether to turn within and discover your true nature or not. And that didn't make sense to me.
Seems like a contradiction.
It is a contradiction. I was like, this is a contradiction. This doesn't make sense. And I was reading other teachings which made more sense. They were less contradictory. So I prefer the other teachings, you see.
What changed then? If you now consider him to be your guru, what changed?
Yeah, I mean, now I can see the incredible beauty, wisdom, and practicality in the way he uses words and concepts. But it took me a long time to appreciate that. But what changed is something unexplainable happened to me, which is I started to fall in love with him. Literally, I started to fall in love with him. And I was not looking to find a guru. I didn't like gurus. You know, I didn't like the idea of a guru. I didn't like the idea of a sort of, I don't know, an authority. I was anti-authority. You know, I wanted to discover it for myself, like a scientist, like the Buddha. The Buddha tried to seek in liberation or enlightenment through the orthodox teachings of the time and didn't find success. So he left them behind and discovered the truth for himself. And that inspired me. And I was also interested earlier on in the teachings of and the writings of J. Krishnamurti. And he was very much like that as well. And anti-authority, discover it for yourself. So I had this fierce independent streak in me. So I wasn't looking to fall in love with someone, especially someone who has already died. He died, Ramana's body passed away in 1950, right?
Before you were
And
born.
and to be frank, I wasn't interested in falling in love with a man, to be honest. you know, who I'd never met before. So, but I started to fall in love with him. And I started to feel this intense love and devotion for him. And this was the beginning of the end. And when that started, I still didn't like his teachings. It's not that I didn't like them.
Bizarre, isn't it?
It is bizarre.
Yeah.
I
It's
liked some
not
of them.
explainable scientifically.
I mean, maybe you could find a scientific explanation, a convergence of factors and events. Maybe you could find things like this. I haven't really looked very hard and I haven't thought about it very much. In fact, the only time I really think about it is when I have these kinds of interviews and I'm kind of forced, let's say. I know you're not forcing me, but I'm
You will tell me, Tom.
but I'm kind of forced to revisit my past experiences and put and verbalize them. Yeah. So these are one of the very few times. These are the very few times where I'm actually kind of go back into to my past, and I've got no qualms about doing it. I'm very happy to do it. You know, I'm not one of those people who say, "Oh, the journey is completely unimportant," because my own experience, a part of the reason I think I fell in love with Bhagavan Ramana, is I read about his story, and his story really inspired me, and I think that let's say facilitated or helped me fall in love with him, because I started to trust him. I didn't trust any of these. I wasn't. It's not like that I didn't trust them. It's I wasn't sure if I could trust them. Whereas with him, I started to feel in love and trust, and I fell in love with what I felt to be his presence in my life. And you know what? It was a bit like how those born again Christians talk about Jesus.
Yes.
It was like that, really.
I was actually going to say that. It was that like because you talked about a relationship with Jesus. So yeah, I get that because I felt that from when I was a born again Christian. I felt as if it was kind of I was in my late teens, 16 onwards, and it was a bit of a joke in our house, where's Susan? Oh, she's up the stairs with Jesus. It was kind of they were mocking me. But that was like, he was like my first love, Jesus was it. So I get that. And actually though, in talking to you, I kind of dismissed that as a teenage kind of, thing, but it is a real thing, isn't it? Developing a love and a relationship for a spiritual figure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a real thing. And the issues are the words it can be cloaked in, and the conceptual framework it can happen within. That kind of experience can be co-opted by the ego mind. It can be co-opted by a dogma and by a conceptual framework that is maybe Christian or biblical or Hindu or whatever. Because I do love the Christian, I was gonna say Christian tradition. Maybe that's not quite right. Maybe I'll stick to the teachings of Jesus. There's some quality about those teachings which is very special to me. And many people who come to my meetings, and who have developed a deeper understanding of Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi's teachings, many of them have kind of fallen away from the church. Being a Brit, being from the UK, being someone who's speaking English, many people who come to me come from some kind of nominally Christian background. Maybe they were like yourself, in which they were once, devout Christians, or maybe not. Maybe they're cultural Catholics or cultural Christians, but most of them have found that through understanding the teachings of Bhagavan Ramana more deeply, they actually can find much more value in their own Christian upbringing. And they can find much more value in their previous spiritual experiences. And many of them start to develop a love for Ramana as well, which is I think is very special. Again, because I am completely biased, because
Yes.
because this is what happened to me.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where I talk from.
Yeah.
That relationship with Bhagavan is everything to me. That is to cloak liberation or enlightenment in words of devotion. That is liberation for me. Falling in love with Bhagavan actually is liberation. They're two different ways of talking about the same thing. We can talk about it using the words of love and devotion. In Sanskrit, what is known as bhakti.
Bhakti, yeah.
Yeah, bhakti means love, devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I was more attracted to the path of jnana, which is spelled Jnana. Sometimes people pronounce it jnana, which is an alternative pronunciation. Gyan or jnana, the path of knowledge. It means knowledge or wisdom, which is what I was interested in for most of my seeking journey, the path of knowledge. The irony is that I fell in love. And that's what I attribute to my realization, as it were. It's, with the caveat that it's not my realization, really, at all.
So let's talk a little more about realization, because there were certain words in that opening statement that I really wanted to draw out. And realization was one of them. And also, so let's talk about that, but from the context of what you also said, that it's already wholly and completely present, that total freedom is here now, because it doesn't seem like that until we see.
That's it.
So speak a bit about that, please. How is it wholly present? If we look out in the world, it looks a mess. What is this freedom that's wholly present now? And how do we find that? How do you work with people and sit with people in order to help them realize that? Give us a flavor of that. Let's imagine, just for the sake of the next 10 minutes or whatever, that I have come to you and said, I've had a glimpse of my true nature. I know that I'm not just this. I've had some spiritual experiences, but I don't feel as if I'm in a state of total freedom, because I'm still vacillating between feeling that I'm not this body, mind, personality and feeling very much contracted inside it and reacting to the things that are happening. Help me to see.
Yeah. And thank you, Susan. Yeah, I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah,
that's what I do. And that's what I've been doing for the last, few years. And what I found is that Bhagavan Ramana's teachings are just the most amazing teachings to facilitate this. And the words he uses, the concepts he uses in the verbal teaching, and the non-verbal aspects of the teaching, which is the deeper aspects of the teaching, is just it's a very potent, wonderful teaching. And what I've also come to realize, is that it's very rare teaching. Many other teachings sound like Ramana's teachings, and they look like Ramana's teachings from a surface point of view. And you can discover what Bhagavan Ramana is pointing to, having never come across Ramana's teachings. But his teachings are so simple, so direct, and so clear. And very importantly, they in words go all the way. So many teachings stop short verbally, and then you're kind of left floundering on the sort of latter parts of the journey. Whereas Bhagavan Ramana's teachings, the verbal teachings, the written teachings in words, take you all the way in terms of the steps to take. So very clear and explicit. And when I come across someone, usually, almost always, they, even if they've had some deep insights, they almost always have a mistaken view of what liberation is. And the more attached someone is to their own view of what liberation is, the less easy it is to communicate. So a lot of what I have to do is deconstruct their ideas of what liberation is and isn't. Because the teaching is very powerful, but it's also incredibly, well, the teachers are very powerful and they're very gentle as well, you know, but they are very radical. They're incredibly radical. And it involves letting go of almost everything. And I'm not interested in forcing anybody or convincing anybody of the value of these teachings, of what I share. But if someone wants to partake with them, then this is what I do. See, and I'm very happy to share, but I'm not interested in trying to convince somebody. But so if somebody's ready to sort of say, you know what, I don't expect somebody to believe what I'm saying or have full faith in me or anything like that. But if somebody's got an open mind, an open heart, and they're willing to listen and be open to what the teachings say, then they're very powerful at delivering exactly what you said, facilitating the discovery of that which is here now, totally whole, complete, devoid of any suffering whatsoever. And but I said it's very radical.
So that all sounded as though you were talking about it rather than giving me a direct experience, a flavor. Can you do that? Because okay. I do have an open mind and I do have an open heart. And what I said earlier of having, you know, there may be people who have had a glimpse of their true nature but are not fully established there. That is me. That is me.
Okay.
And so I'm just sensing an opportunity here in this moment, and I am feeling a little emotional all of a sudden. But there just feels as though there's an opportunity or I don't know, there's a meeting here, Tom, which feels a little vulnerable for me in this podcast host situation.
Yes.
I'm not sitting next to you on your lovely sofa there, you know. But it feels, in this moment, it feels as though there is something here.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that's when I sort of work the best, to be honest, because I'm not very good at sort of answering questions that are like just an interviewer asking some standard questions. And what I really respond to, and I don't do this purposefully, it's just what I've noticed. What I really respond to is when someone genuinely has a desire to discover their own true nature, which is infinite happiness, infinite bliss, infinite love, consciousness. It's pure divinity. This is what we really are. We're not these body-mind entities at all. And we're not separate. There's only one. There's only one. This can be directly experienced. When somebody, and it's not experienced, but it won't be experienced by Susan or Tom ever. So Tom and Susan as limited entities, if that's what we mean by those words, Tom and Susan, they're never going to get this. So Tom has never understood any of this, really. There's something much more special and holy. And what I respond to, again, I have to use words like I, right? When I speak, what I respond to is when somebody has that kind of thirst. So the fact that you are able to show that vulnerability on this podcast means everything from my point of view, in the sense that now then that's when the communication, communion and coming together really starts to happen for me, because that's what inspires me to talk. I'm not inspired to talk otherwise. I don't want to talk otherwise, really. I'm not interested in sharing this otherwise. But when somebody wants to learn, or not learn, but experience or see or realize, whatever word you want to use, none of these words are quite right, because we'll discover that liberation isn't a knowledge. It's not even an experience, and it cannot be put into words, really, at all. But when somebody has that thirst, this is what inspires me to speak and to share. So to address what you're asking me, it isn't actually anything I don't think it's anything I can give you, but I can point to you to discover this for yourself. What I can perhaps give you is what I think is through spending time with me, through being with me. And I'm cautious when I say this, because it's not really about me, but I do want to share something truthfully. And I do feel that through spending time with me, through being with me, there is something that comes across. And some of that will be verbally, the things I say, and some of that will be something else that comes across. Because a lot of the teachings are just little things here and there. It's not like, okay, read these 10 points or read these 10 chapters in a book and that's the teaching. It's a living, breathing teaching. I'm wary that I still haven't sort of directly addressed your point, though. See, what we are is divine. What we are is truly infinite. And what we are, I mean, we can call it spirit. What is spirit? All these words. And what we are, we actually already know what we are. It's not Susan per se knowing this, but it's what you are knowing what you are. You know, somehow, you can tell me if I'm wrong or right, somehow you know you are much vaster, much greater than a simple body mind. The mind might argue against that. The mind might retaliate and say, well, what about this? What about that? And have lots of questions, which are valid. They're fine. Then we can address those. But there is a part of you, I suggest, you tell me if this is right or not, that knows already that it is pure infinite love, beingness, divinity, holy, sacred, whole, complete, perfect, And that's what I am, and that's what you are. Not Tom. Tom's an idiot. Tom's a complete imbecile, yeah? Okay, he says some intelligent things every now and again, but Tom's just a person, right? But what I really am is what you really are. This is what we can discover. And these superficial appearances are then seen to be just that. But what most of us live in is the opposite. We think these superficial appearances are reality. And that is suffering. If you think you're Susan and you think I'm Tom, or if I think I'm Tom and I think you're Susan, and that's the reality, that is actually suffering there and then. Now, there's this deep wisdom we have, and all we have to really do is turn towards that wisdom. Now, how to do that and what exactly that means is what I then usually start to share with people. And what people do, they'll understand what I'm saying often, and then they'll make a mistake or they'll drift off. They'll veer away from the path, as it were, 5 minutes later, 5 hours later, 5 days later, and I just steer them back on again. And then they'll veer off the path again, because this is what happens. This is what the ego mind does. It veers you off the path. You won't even realize it. You think you're on the path. Often, I don't know, I'm not saying you will. I'm saying people often veer off the path. They think they're still on the path. But this is the value of a teacher, is that the teacher can see when you've gone off the path. You think you're on the path, the teacher can direct you back onto the path again, if that makes sense. And ultimately, you discover that Tom also is a superficiality. And what Tom is really is just yourself calling back to yourself. This is what happened with me and Bhagavan Ramana, you see, is that I thought he was someone else. Even though I would have said, oh yeah, he's one with me, I'm one with him. I was relating to him as if he was someone else. And you discover that he is I am he. Not Tom is Ramana, but what I truly am is Bhagavan Ramana. And this is love. This is total bhakti, love, devotion. So I don't know if anything of what I said made sense at all. I don't know. So for you to tell me if that makes any sense to you. And then what usually happens is the process of feedback. So you then share with me what, if anything, I said resonated with you. And then there's an exchange. And this is usually how it works, rather than any kind of solid specific teaching per se.
What came up for me as you were speaking was, I do know that. And to go right back to almost the beginning of our conversation, I knew that without words when I was 5 years old. And a combination of conditioning and training and religious education and the development of a very strong spiritual ego, I would say, took me completely, or seemed to take me completely away from that knowing. And I said before, I feel emotional and vulnerable, and I do, but there's some energy that you alluded to, that it's not just the words. There's a, even in this context of us, being on Zoom together here, there's a transmission happening. There's a, the way I would describe it is, there is something in me, and that's not even the right words, but there's something here that is resonating and responding to something over there.
Yeah.
That I can't even explain.
That's it. Yeah, I can feel tears welling up for me.
And me.
It's very precious.
Thank you.
Very precious, very special. I feel exactly the same as you. And this often happens, is I will start to feel whatever the person who comes to me starts to feel, And when people start to feel, and they don't have to feel these things, by the way, but if they start to feel love or gratitude, then I start to feel that towards them as well. So I've learned to realize that I know what somebody else is feeling just by knowing what I'm feeling. When I start to feel love, I know they're feeling love. Mm-hmm. So it's funny because there are all these aspects of the scriptures that I used to not like at all. Like in the Hindu scriptures, in the Vedanta scriptures, it says things like you should approach the guru. I hated that word. You should approach the guru with love and devotion, right? And I didn't like that because you're elevating a human being, right? But now I can see that when people do approach me with love and affection, not putting me on a pedestal, hopefully, but just as you might approach a friend, so maybe someone you admire, not putting them on a pedestal, but someone you maybe admire is the wrong word, respect, value, then that allows the teaching to flourish. Because otherwise, if someone comes to me with a cold heart and says, all right, Tom, what have you got for me? I haven't got anything.
Yeah.
It's not because I'm trying to be mean. There's nothing there in me that wants to speak to that person. And because there's no sort of agenda to push a teaching, it's like, oh, well, I haven't got anything. Whereas if someone comes to me and says, Tom, I don't know if I believe what you're saying at all. I don't know you, but, I'm really interested in this. Then that's the beginning of a conversation, of an interaction, maybe even of a relationship. This is where the heart starts to open. It's very special. It's very special.
It's strange because I almost don't want to speak. Obviously, I'm going to have to speak. We're on a podcast. But
we don't have to speak. I feel the same. Sometimes I have to force myself to say something. But there's that, and we're on a podcast, right? But actually, the deeper teaching is happening through the presence. This is what happened to me in Bhagavan. Yeah. Basically, this is what happened to me. This is why, and I didn't realize that was happening to me actually, because I didn't have anyone putting it into words. I didn't have a sort of human teacher in front of me, as it were.
I think what I'm feeling, Tom, is such a sense of recognition. It's almost like I feel as if a curtain has been drawn back and I'm recognizing something that I'm realizing I've always known.
Yeah.
But in the looking for it, I was looking in the wrong place. Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense. Of course it does. One thing I encourage people to do is express themselves in their own language. This is very helpful and a very beautiful thing to do, because you can use very dualistic language, but it's fine when it's coming from the heart, So it does make sense. One thing I will say though, Susan, is that this teaching goes much deeper than what I've just shared right now. So this is just the beginning. And when we follow this intuition that you have, that we all have, I suspect, well, I know we all have this, because it's what we actually are. And we follow that, it's like going down the rabbit hole in a good way. It will start to strip us away of all our illusions and delusions and ego and suffering. And it takes us home to God, to heaven. It's like the prodigal son returning home. Now, the irony of what I wrote on my website is that when we discover what we truly are, there is nothing left to integrate. There's nothing left. So there's no integration. People often ask me, they say, oh, Tom, how do you do this? How have you integrated spirituality? My honest answer is, one, I don't know. And two, I haven't. You don't have to. Once you discover Jesus Christ, once you discover Bhagavan in your heart, once you discover God, these are the same. Jesus, Bhagavan, yourself, God, Guru, these are all the same. It's all you. Once you discover that, there's nothing left. There's nothing left to integrate. There's no need for integration. Integration is only for when the ego is still there. when the sense of individuality is still there. That needs to integrate. So one thing I do is when seekers are engaging with these teachings, they often come up with difficulties in their life, maybe relationship difficulties, financial difficulties, whatever, existential difficulties. And I help them integrate that aspect. Not because integration is the aim, but just to make their life a little bit easier so they can actually discover the reality, the truth themselves. You see, and once you discover the truth, there's no integration required. Many teachings say that once you discovered spirituality, you then got to integrate it. Whereas actually, that's when you still haven't fully realized. To be truthful, you haven't realized. With realization, there's nothing afterwards. There's nothing left to do. And again, Bhagavan Ramana is very clear about that. So this is one of the values of his teachings. Again, I've come to, in retrospect, realize how amazing his teachings are.
Yeah. I feel this is not my it's not my first taste of my true nature. But I don't I'm finding it hard to speak.
Just speak naturally. It doesn't matter if the words aren't right, because when you speak naturally, there's a communication that occurs if the other person's open to you, and I'm certainly open to you, Susan.
So I would say that I've known, but known is not the right word, but I've known that I'm not Susan for quite some time.
Yes.
However, what I truly am was known about, glimpsed occasionally. I used the image a moment ago of the curtain feels as if it has been drawn back. I would say right up until this very moment, I was peeking through, and then the curtain drew back again. I was peeking through again, and I knew on the other side was what I really am. But somehow it's as though there never was a curtain. Something has shifted from that scientific mind that wanted to know down to my heart. And it seems really, really, really obvious. Do you know any Rumi poems, Tom? There's a Rumi poem coming to me. What's the one that says, what is it? Something about if you've always known from the beginning of time. Do you know the poem I'm talking about?
I can't recall it, but I've probably read it. because I read lots of Rumi when I was
I love
a
Rumi.
teenager.
Do you have a book of Rumi poems? But feels important. I'm just going to read this because it's just come in my mind. Forget your life. Say God is great. Get up. You think you know what time it is. It's time to pray. You've carved so many little figurines, too many. Don't knock on any random door like a beggar. Reach your long hand out to another door beyond where you go on the street where everyone says, "How are you?" and no one says, "How aren't you?" Tomorrow you'll see what you've broken and torn tonight, thrashing in the dark. Inside you, there's an artist you don't know about. He's not interested in how things look different in moonlight. If you are here unfaithfully with us, you're causing terrible damage. If you've opened your loving to God's love, you're helping people you don't know and have never seen. Is what I say true? Say yes quickly, if you know it, if you've known it from the beginning of the universe. This has been
Beautiful.
a holy encounter, Tom.
For me too.
Thank
For
you.
me too. Yeah. I'm very grateful to you as well, Susan. It's amazing to share this kind of thing with somebody else. You know, this is a meeting. This is a communion. This is how the teaching works. You see how it's not just the words, it's something else as well.
Yeah.
And as I said, Susan, this is just the beginning. Because you have to go deeper and deeper. And this, if you follow this, you'll realize that Bhagavan Ramana's teachings are fundamentally actually different to many other teachings. Because he takes you by the hand lovingly, gently, and walks you to your destination. The whole journey is a loving, wonderful journey. There's no force required, it's just love. And the deeper you go, the more familiar it will be. It's like, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning stages, the mind will keep on co-opting it. The mind will keep on coming in and taking ownership. You know, make it into an experience.
I feel I have done that for so many years. By trying to intellectually understand and hold on to what I thought my understanding was.
Of course, that's the function. That's one of the functions of the mind. And I did the same, you know, and everyone does the same. So it's not a negative or a positive thing. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And that's what I help people do, is break through that. And there's a very specific practice that we will come to realize we have to do. It can sound quite, what's the word? Narrow to say there's only one way, right? This is what cults say. Cults say, oh, there's only one way, it's my way.
My way, yes.
Yeah. It's only one way. Oh, and that happens to be my way, you know. But that you'll come to discover that there's one way. And you'll come to discover this yourself. This is the beauty of it. I'm trying to think of an example in science. I can't quite think of an example. It might be like there's only one way to discover that the Earth goes around the sun rather than the sun going around the Earth, and that is you can look at the stars and plot their positions, and then you'll discover. I mean, it's not a great analogy because there might be other ways as well of discovering that. But we'll come to realize there's one practice we have to do, and this is what Ramana kept on going on about. He said we have to do self-inquiry. And what self-inquiry does is several things at the same time. But we all have to walk through the door of self-inquiry. And that essentially removes the mind's tendency to grab and conceive and create all these problems. And there are other ways to do it too, but none of them quite take you to the final destination. And ultimately, you have to go for self-inquiry. Even if you just do it for a second at the end, you have to go through that door. You don't have to know about self-inquiry to do it. You don't even have to call it self-inquiry. In Bhagavan Ramana's own story, he had never heard of self-inquiry before, but he did it, and he realized who he was. And then later he taught that and called it self-inquiry, which is the traditional name for it. Atma Vichara. Vichara means inquiry. Atma means self. So this is just, if you feel something, that should be encouraged. That should be nurtured. That should be honored. And I honor that in you. But know that this is the start of something wonderful if you want to follow it.
And so what is the next step then?
Well, the next practical steps are two things. One is the intellectual side of the teaching, the verbal aspects of the teaching, and one is your heart. Yeah, they're both actually important. One is to keep this heart communication open. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean with me, by the way, although it can do, but it means that feeling, that heart connection feeling you have, to keep on coming back to that. Yeah. I encourage you, if you resonate with me, to keep contact with me. And I hold meetings twice a week, online, on Zoom. So I encourage people to keep on coming to those. The mind plays tricks. The mind will say, oh, I don't need any more meetings and things like this. That may be true. If that is true, then you don't need to keep on coming. But for most people, I found that isn't true. You need to get repeated exposure to me, to the teachings, to the presence. That's one aspect. So one is, in your own self, be open to this feeling as much as you can. Nurture it, honor it. Let it grow, let it speak to you. And this is your inner teacher. Two is the outer teacher. Maybe if you resonate with me, that can be me. Yeah. And three is there are recommended reading on tomdas.com. There's a recommended reading list. And I've read so much stuff, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Vedanta, yoga, Gnostic Christianity, some Sufism. I don't claim to be experts in all these things, but I just read for such a long time because I'm such a geek and so scientifically orientated and frustrated with seeking for a couple of decades. But there are only very few books on my recommended reading list. I try and keep the list really small, and you can read that and pick a book on there and start to work your way through. And this will give you a conceptual framework from the teachings. You'll see you probably see it's not this. I might be wrong. Maybe it is the same as what you're already aware of. But for most people I come across, there are differences between what those books that I recommend are saying and what most other spiritual teachings are saying. So I guess these are the three things that are coming up now for you. One is nurture and honor your own inner resonance, inner teacher. spend time with an external teacher who you'll discover is just yourself, you know, and then engage with the teachings. This is the first thing, next steps for you. There'll be a little bit more, but that's the way forward, I'd suggest. What do you think?
Yes. I have also done extensive reading in all of those areas that you have mentioned. I recently completed a 2-year ministerial program, interfaith ministerial program, which I studied lots of paths. In addition to having been a Christian, I was also a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist for many years. I don't know that I'm not at the beginning of the path.
No, not at all. Maybe though you're not at the beginning of the path. I mean, we could say you've been on the path for thousands and thousands of years if you want to.
Yes.
You know? So no one I meet is at the beginning of the path, but maybe this is the beginning of a new part, maybe, or a new aspect of your journey. You know, maybe this is the beginning of the end. And seeing that sense as the beginning, because sometimes when you say beginning, it can almost feel like an insult, because it's like, well, hang on a sec, Tom. I've been slogging my guts on this for like, months, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, millennia. This is my 500th lifetime of being a spiritual seeker or whatever it is. So but I do have to, I do try and express myself as I try and keep it as real as possible and share what I feel. I don't always get it right, so you feel free to correct me. You know better than I do. I think there is a beginning here, in the sense that there's something new. That's what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what really resonated most of what you said there was stay with that heart opening.
Yes. Because actually the other two things are just to facilitate that.
Yeah.
The books and the external teacher are just to facilitate that. So you've intuited the most important of those three. But if you're like most people I come across, I used to always emphasize that one. But what I realized happened is that people keep on falling away. And then for the other two pillars become important. I never used to recommend people read books. And then I never used to really emphasize people keeping in contact with me. But then I realized what happens is that they keep on veering away from the path. They'll maybe attend a few satsang meetings with me for 2-3 weeks. They'll feel like they're on the path, and then they'll go away, and that'll be fine. I'll be happy for them. And then 9 months later, they'll crop up again, and they're finding things difficult. And then they'll come again for another few weeks, and then they'll disappear off. And then 6 months later, they'll come again. And this is, I've started to realize, oh, this is not efficient. This is not helpful for them. I don't want sort of people to become dependent on me. At the same time, I have found that regular contact with me is helpful. So I don't know, maybe you can help me out with that. How do I communicate that? Maybe I just say what I'm saying now. I don't know. It seems quite wordy.
I think what what gives that whole thing context is the fact that you have said over and over and over again, I'm not talking about Tom here. You're not saying come and spend time with Tom because Tom knows everything and Tom will teach you his one way. That's not at all what you're saying. And I don't know how this is going to come across as a podcast experience. I'm sensing that we're going to have to edit quite a bit here. I don't know how it will come across, whether the connection that happened, the transmission that happened, the emotion and the opening that I am feeling will be felt to the listener, but that's what you come for.
Yeah.
That's the something has happened between us here, and yeah, so that's offering that to people is important for those that have that heart connection. Because I asked you the question earlier, and then I said, well, you've told me all about it, but you've not actually, because that just felt really important to me. I just had a such sense of shifting from Susan, the podcast interviewer who wants to get a good podcast, that people will enjoy, to actually feeling, no, there's something in this moment with this person that just started to kind of vibrate inside me, I think. And I didn't want to miss that opportunity. It felt, no, this is why you're here. And as I say, I don't know how this is going to be, how this will come across as a listening or watching experience, but it transcended that. It was not, it became not about that, and about the meeting of not Tom with not Susan.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
it's because you're open to it, it's because you're open to it, and then you sense that opportunity, and you went with that rather than retreating back into your podcast role. You went with that, and you're open to it. That's what happened. So you come with an open heart and open mind. I can't promise anything, but if it's meant to be, it'll happen.
And I think that's why I was so just taken with those little bits, those only two sentences on your website where we began. You said, so let's review those again. The point of this teaching is the realization of a total freedom, which is already wholly and completely present. That's what I've experienced right here. This seeing or feeling or sensing, or I don't know the word, that it is here, totally here.
Yes.
And the emphasis, which is your emphasis, what you do, is on facilitating a genuine practical realization in the midst of daily living. And what's actually happened here, facilitated a genuine practical realization in the midst of a podcast.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no accidents, Tom.
So I would say all thanks to Bhagwan's grace. That's what I would say. I don't take credit for it. You are open to it, but even you can't take credit for it.
No.
So my expression is all Bhagwan's grace. But that is just ourself.
Yeah. Consciousness waking up to itself. So to bring our podcast episode to a conclusion, you are going to be coming to spend time with us in this is hilarious, the Integrated Awakening series.
Yes.
In November. And the title is The End of Suffering. So I'm really looking forward. I mean, I don't think we need to give much explanation. I think what's happened here is a demonstration of what happens when you come with an open heart and willingness, and so for those listening, I hope that you'll come and join Tom in the End of Suffering series. There are four, I think it's four 90-minute classes in November. Is there anything you'd like to say about that, Tom, before we finish?
I mean, hopefully we've said what we need to say.
Yeah.
One thing that's come to mind is that maybe we can call, I don't know how it works with the session title, but maybe we can call one of them something like Discovering Your True Nature. I don't know if that would work with the format.
Yeah.
You know, because they're the two aspects really. One, it's the same thing, but we can talk about it as ending suffering or discovering your true nature. The same thing. One is a positive way of talking about it, discovering what you are. The other one's negating what you remove, which is suffering.
Yeah.
So maybe we could do that.
There's 4 classes, isn't there? Four classes. Yeah. What's coming? So yeah, those are good titles for the first 2, perhaps.
Yeah, I agree.
After that,
we can make up 2 more titles.
That's the beginning, you know. So the next 2 are what happens next. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it has. It absolutely has. So thank you everyone for listening, and yeah, I hope you enjoy and experience something of what I've experienced today with Tom Das. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.